I would like to introduce Dr. Chandu Visweswariah, whom you had the opportunity to see in the morning. Just a brief introduction. Dr. Chandu Visweswariah is a renewable energy entrepreneur and strategist. He's a co-founder and vice president of CURE100 and CURE100, community-based environmental not-for-profits. Chandu co-founded and led Utopus Insights as president and CEO previously. His notable career at IBM Research earned him the title of IBM Fellow in 2013, where he headed the Smarter Energy and Environmental Science team. Chandu has a rich technical background with significant contributions in chip design, statistical timing, and circuit optimization. He pivoted from researcher to entrepreneur in 2017, successfully spinning out of Utopus Insights from IBM Research and facilitating its acquisition by Vestas, the world's largest wind turbine manufacturer. His accomplishments include over 100 publications, 119 patents, and leadership roles in environmental nonprofits. With that, I'd like to open the floor to Dr. Chandu.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is supposed to be an interactive session. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, wake up, wake up. So thank you very much to Rahul for that kind introduction, but a special thanks to Rahul for collaborating with me in putting together this talk, which I think is a provocative talk, and I would be very happy if you disagreed with me on some of the things that I'm going to say. So start collecting your list of things to disagree with me. But I think at the end of this talk, we will agree on two things. Number one, that the energy space is interesting, fascinating, full of opportunity for all of us, and full of opportunity for India. And number two, by discussing this topic, we will learn something, okay, even if you disagree with me. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. This is an interactive session. It's only going to work if we have audience participation. So all of you need to participate. We have three different modes of audience participation. The first one is that you will get to vote on many, many important topics. So if you haven't done so already, take out your smartphone. Everybody, take out your smartphone. Go to menti.com, menti.com right now. It'll ask you for an 8-digit code, 4650-4407. Everybody who's on the Zoom call, you get to vote as well. So please go to menti.com and enter the 8-digit code 4650-4407. If there's anyone in this hall who has not yet done this, please raise your hand. Okay, you're in the process of doing it. Okay. I thought we may have some conscientious objectors or something. So this is all about participation, guys. We're going to have some fun with this topic, okay? There will also be some slides where you will see this symbol, which means a show of hands. And I want your hands to go right up when you see the answer that you think which is correct. And there will be some other slides which have this symbol, which means if you know the answer, just blurt it out. Just speak up, yell, go right away. Okay? Everyone got it? This is all about audience interaction. Now, this session is very special. This book that I'm holding here is called The Ministry for the Future. It's a book by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's a science fiction book. I hate science fiction. I've never liked it. But I love this book. Why? Because it's about the near future of what will happen in the rest of this century due to climate change. And Indian scientists and events in India play a very central role in this fascinating book. One of you, based on your participation, will receive this book at the end of this session. So stay awake. With that, we get to our first poll question. The question goes as follows. India's published policy is net zero by 2070, right? So the question I'm asking is, irrespective of that policy, should India strive to obtain net zero at 2070 or earlier or later? Put in your opinion. Maybe most will agree with the government and put 2070. I don't know. But I'm going to give you a few seconds to vote, and then we will close the voting and we will see the results. So just a few more seconds. Everybody choose your response. Hit the submit button. I want everybody who's on Zoom to vote. Otherwise, we'll eject you. No, I didn't. No, I didn't say. We would never do that. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, let's close the voting. Nikhil, can you please do that for us? Okay, so here's the results. 57% out of the only meager 47 people that voted. I think half the remote crowd is sleeping. 57% think we should accelerate net zero to 2047. I don't know how you guys think we'll do that. I don't know why you think we should do that. I don't know why you think it's to our benefit, but hey, that's the majority. There's 11% that says, and don't worry about it. We got 75 years, no problem. And 32% agree with the Indian government's position that we should get to net zero by 2070. So let's go to the next slide, please, Nikhil. We're going to have a fun discussion. It's going to be in 3 parts, but pay attention because this is different from a usual outline. We are going to assume that we can achieve net zero by 2047. We're going to assume that it's to our benefit, but we're going to only ask the question, is it a climate imperative? That's section 1. Similarly, in section 2, we will assume it's a climate imperative and it's to our great benefit, but can we even do it? And then in section 3, we will assume these two and ask the question, but why in the hell would we pull our hair out and do such a difficult thing? Okay? If the answer is a resounding yes to all 3, then I think the smart people in this room can go and change the way things are being done. That's my hope. But we'll see where we go. That's the outline here. So what we are talking about is climate stability of this beautiful blue marble that we call our planetary home, and whether we should accelerate that climate stability. So, audience participation, I'm going to make some statements. CO2 in the atmosphere is presently 420 parts per million. 180 to 280 is the known historical range for the last 800,000 years till the Industrial Revolution. And 350 parts per million is the sustainable limit. This is a show of hands. Those who think all these statements are largely true, raise your hand. Those who think these statements are largely false, raise your hand. Those who didn't vote at all, raise your hand. I am sorry to say that all of these statements are indeed true. If you look at this graph, on the vertical axis is carbon dioxide in parts per million, and on the horizontal axis is the year starting 800,000 years ago. And we're going to take a little journey through time, and it's between 180 and 280. Something happened in the last 100 years, which is a second in geological time, and put that in perspective, and we are up at 420. Calpurnia, what have we done? We've messed this one up pretty bad. So, another statement. Yes?
How can we measure the carbon level?
Great question. Thank you. Give the man. I'm so happy somebody asked a question. Yes. So how do we know what happened 800,000 years ago? Well, I've lived for a long time, but not that long. It's ice cores, right? So we take ice cores and we're able to measure the carbon content, and the deeper you get the ice core, the further back in time you go. And these are pretty darn accurate. We have great confidence that we know what happened. Why does it go up and down? There's volcanoes and so on, right? So you get some warming, you get some cooling. But it's been pretty much between 180 and 280. Okay, audience participation again. We are emitting 59 billion tons of greenhouse gases. Now, Professor Rajneesh told us this morning 42 billion tons. That's only CO2. We have three important greenhouse gases: CO2, methane, nitrous oxide. I've added them all up, and we are emitting 59 billion tons. I mean, a gas, you talk about a gas in tons and then billions. I mean, that is a lot. 75% of these are from our energy use. As a result, the heat gets trapped, and we have already warmed 1.2 degrees. This is a show of hands. Those who believe these statements are largely true, put up your hand. Okay, those who think these are false, put up your hand. Okay, we have 2. Wonderful. So which statement do you think is false? Anybody? Second statement. Okay, we'll look at that. So, unfortunately, all of these are true. It is a sad state of affairs, and let me anticipate your question and show you that this is the inventory of greenhouse gases worldwide based on the use sector. And you see that there's energy use in industry, in transport, in buildings, etc. That adds up to 73.2%. So is it really 75? No, but it's close enough, right? So the bottom line is we're burning fossil fuels. It's putting CO2 and methane in the air. There are other things as well, like agriculture and so on, of course. Okay, and we've already warmed 1.2 degrees. So let's look at that 1.2 degrees of warming. This is at the end of 2022 when it was 1.1 degrees of warming. We've already gone up another 0.1. 92% of all the heat goes into the ocean. Thank goodness for the ocean. We would be dead by now without the ocean. 92% of the heat goes there, and it warms up less than the land. The land takes more of a temperature increase, and the further away from the equator you go, the more warming you get, which is bad news for what? The polar ice caps, the glaciers. Yeah, it's really bad news. So now, as a result of all this warming, what are the dangers we face? And I'll get us started. It's global warming, so we face extreme heat. In India, in this year 2023, there are 15 cities that had 5 or more days of extreme heat, meaning you should not be outdoors during those days. And there are 12 cities that had 100 days or more of above average temperatures. Clearly, global averages are going up. We all understand that. What are the other dangers or bad effects from climate change? Blurt it out.
Frequent natural disasters.
Frequent natural disasters. Excuse me? Extended summer. Sea level rise. So let me talk about that for just 1 second. Most people don't understand, but the ocean is just a huge body of water. And you raise the temperature by 0.9 degrees, it expands. So there's more water, and it's warmer. So it melts the polar ice cap, which slips into the ocean. So we're going to get sea level rise, and practically every low-lying country or city in the world is in danger. From Miami to Venice to Nauru to Marshall Islands, you name it, it's in danger. Okay? Then, somebody talked about this, extreme weather. So we get more droughts, more floods. We have warmer air. The warmer air is more moist. It holds more moisture. You get these extreme river cyclones or cyclone bombs, and we just saw one this week. I made this slide before you guys had a cyclone, by the way, right? So what else? What else? What are the bad effects from climate change? Humidity, yes. Food crisis, thank you. Migration, thank you. So I was looking for forest fires here, and it's basically what happens is that the forests have more basically drier weather that they face. They also face wetter weather, but they're more extreme, so you get more fires. Now, those of you here from Australia, year before last, was completely crazy, unheard of. This gentleman from California, they suffered like crazy. And this summer, there's more of Canada that burnt down than 3 US states combined area. And in New York, we couldn't even breathe. There was the air was red and brown. It was never seen anything like that. Forest fires, somebody already mentioned. Oh, here's a really important one. All of the CO2 that goes into the ocean, what happens to it? Chemists. Yeah, thank you. It actually produces some carbonic acid in the process. That carbonic acid changes the pH, and the coral reefs get bleached as a result. Now, the coral reefs are the start of a whole aquatic food chain, and that whole thing gets upset. And I'll show you some pictures of that. We talked about habitat loss. This is a very, very important one. In fact, most people say that we are facing 3 simultaneous crises. We're facing the climate crisis, we're facing a biodiversity collapse, and we're facing an environmental justice crisis. The people least responsible for this catastrophe are the ones most affected all over the world. This is just a rule, right? So talk about biodiversity. As things warm, species are migrating from the equator up towards the poles. They suddenly face new predators, new insects, new pests, and they die. So we're losing species, and we could lose species by the millions. Somebody said crop failures. Now, when you have extreme flooding, extreme droughts, that's not what you would like to have if you're a farmer. That's pretty obvious. And someone else talked about climate migrants, right? So even the slightest political instability combined with crop failures, mass exodus of people. We've seen it in Pakistan, we've seen it in Bangladesh, we've seen it in the Middle East, and we're going to see more and more of that. And all of the above and more. Now, all of these are with 1.5 degrees of warming. And we've thought for a long time that we will take some actions to limit ourselves to 1.5 degrees of warming. So this is what it looks like when these ice sheets melt. This is what it looks like when water comes into big cities. Now, to be fair, this is the cover of a book. It's fictitious, except it could really happen. This is a brilliant cover from a recent New Yorker magazine that showed what subway service in New York City will look like very soon. And the gondolier is so cheerful taking his boat through the subway system. That is funny. This is sort of what happened here in Chennai. These are the bomb cyclones or river cyclones that we talked about. The air holds so much moisture that it just dumps an enormous amount of rain in a very short period of time. And is there a civil engineer in the house? There is no drainage that can handle this. And I just walked to Narmada Hostel the other day. The water was above the seats of the bicycles, right? You just can't imagine. Crazy. Forest fires, hotter, bigger than anybody has ever experienced or known. We talked about that already. Coral reefs getting bleached. We've lost somewhere near 75% of warm water coral reefs. And at 2 degrees of warming, they'll be all gone forever. And the picture on the right shows shifting habitats of certain birds. This is a bird called the loon. And in the inset, you see a species called a Maui nukupu, a very pretty bird, which is gone. No one will ever never see it again. It's extinct. 23 species were declared extinct recently. But we know all this. We know all these bad things are happening. I'm going to go one step further here and say that if we go beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade, we are going to face some tipping points. So what is a tipping point? A tipping point is when a system has positive feedback. Something bad happens, it makes something else worse, it makes the first thing more bad, and it keeps going, and it gallops out of our control, right? So what might be a climate tipping point? Somebody cannot hear. So Rahul, I am speaking quite loudly here in the room, so our electronics are letting us down. I'm just going to keep going, and hopefully someone can fix that. Check. Are you guys hearing it in the speakers or only? Check. Okay, good. So what might be some of the tipping points that we face? And by the way, all of these tipping points, check. Okay, good. Very feeble. Okay. All right, so in this audience, anybody, what might be a tipping point that we face? At least one. Yes. What about the Amazon? Excellent. What else?
Atmosphere further leading to global warming.
Wonderful. What else? The most common one. Yes? Yes, so looks like my thing isn't working. Just advance it for me, please. Okay, that's exactly right. So it's called the albedo effect. And think about this, right? You have an ice cover, the edge of the ice melts, exposing the brown earth. The brown earth absorbs more infrared radiation than the shiny ice piece. So that piece warms up, and guess what? More ice melts, and it releases more brown earth, and that absorbs more heat, and so on. That's a tipping point. And then somebody talked about methane. In the permafrost across Siberia, across the whole tundra, there's a frozen permafrost, and that has pockets of methane in it. And when that melts, it just releases that methane, and methane is a dangerous, dangerous greenhouse gas. And somebody, I believe, talked about the forest becoming positive in the back there. And we think of the forests as our lungs. They're going to breathe for us. They're going to clean the air for us. And unfortunately, with forest fires and other effects, they are becoming carbon positive instead of carbon negative, right? And that's a really dangerous situation. Now, there's one more I'm looking for. Anybody? Say that again. Ocean acidification is definitely a phenomenon. I don't think of it as a tipping point because I don't see a feedback loop there. Yeah. Maybe a fair point, but second order, I would say, right? There's another one that's been discussed pretty hot and heavy recently in the environmental space.
Heat waves, fires, acid rain. Yeah, these are all good guesses, but there's a solid tipping point with positive feedback, which is fossil methane. So what is fossil methane? It's methane that is deep in underground, miles underground, and often due to seismic activity, it will find a path to come up. And if the permafrost is frozen, it gets capped. And if the permafrost is melted, it can release absolutely enormous amounts of methane, which increases the warming, which releases more methane, and so on. So the key message I want to leave you with all of this climate stuff is that we've got to avoid these tipping points. So maybe you warm 1.5, maybe you warm 1.8, but at some point you're going to trip these tipping points. At some point the coral reefs will be fully gone, and that should be our benchmark that we are trying to avoid and mitigate, okay? So I'm going to end this first section by discussing a carbon budget. What is a carbon budget? A carbon budget is just like a money budget. I give you 100,000 rupees, I give you 10 lakh rupees and say, you have to survive for some period of time, right? So that's how a budget works. Yes?
So it's out of my curiosity, actually, I ask myself this question always. So is it humanly possible to stop rising the temperature, earth temperature, number one? Why I'm asking is, see, like every day we are receiving energy from the sun. It's like heating a ball, a steel ball with a candle with some distance. So after some time, definitely it gets temperature will get raised. So,
yeah, good question.
So like that, So if you, because of the distance between sun and earth,
Yeah.
so there'll be always a energy transfer from earth to sun. So maybe after some years, the temperature will rise.
So that is not true. So basically, the sun is the source of all of our energy, right? That's where we get it from. And there are various effects warming the earth and various effects cooling it down, etc. And these have been in equilibrium for a long, long time. We have artificially put so much of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It acts sort of like a one-way mirror. It lets the heat in, but when it bounces off the earth to go back, it traps it and keeps it inside. So the science on this is very clearly understood at this point. There are models that describe this. So the simple answer to your question is, if we stop emitting greenhouse gases fairly quickly, in less than 5 years, you will see the temperatures come down, right? It's a direct correlation. That's the answer to your question, right? So we want it to go back to where it was prior to the Industrial Revolution. That's what we want to do. And I'm going to try to answer exactly that question. Hold your thought for just a sec. To answer your question, this slide will tell you instructively what we need to do to achieve, stopping the warming, right? So a carbon budget, as I said, is just like a money budget. You have to live within that budget over some period of time. And of course, once you achieve net zero, you're not using the budget anymore, right? It's 0 plus 0 plus 0. So cumulatively, it doesn't add up. So today we are at just about 60 billion tons of greenhouse gases globally. We said that before. Now imagine if we just went down straight, linear, go down. This is the annual emissions, right? And we go down to 0 by the year 2040, right? That's the green line. What I'm going to do now is add up how much carbon we're spending each year and sort of integrate that green curve, right, in relation to the right side vertical axis. So I'm just adding up to date how much carbon have we done. And once we achieve net zero at 2040, it becomes flat because we're not spending our budget anymore. We end up with approximately 700 gigatons. And the warming, according to that, will be about 1.6 degrees with 50% probability. There is a little uncertainty around it, right? And we all understand that that's impractical, not going to happen, unlikely, etc., right? Although, don't underestimate, if we have a huge natural disaster, how much effort we might take and actually achieve that. What if we achieve net zero by 2047, which is the theme of this talk, our 100th birthday? And if I integrate that, I end up with about 900 gigatons of carbon. And again, after 2047, it stops increasing because it's net zero. And we end up with about 1.8 degrees of warming. And if I go to 2070, which is our published policy, let's say the whole world does that, and I integrate that, we end up with a really terrible result, which is about 2.8 degrees of warming, where it's pretty clear that some of these tipping points will come into play, right? So somewhere between here and here, we are gambling with the dice, right? With the livability of the earth hanging in the balance, small little odds, we're playing a little game of dice, right? That's really what this chart tells you. So I'm going to conclude this section, and I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Assuming we can do it, and assuming we should do it, it's in our benefit, how many people think it is a climate imperative to achieve net zero by about 2047? Raise your hand. Just a climate imperative. Okay, how many people think that purely from climate reasons is not a good reason to achieve net zero by 2047? Okay, pretty unanimous on section 1. We're doing well. Now we'll get into rough weather, so hold your thoughts. So in this next section, we're going to ask the question, can we achieve net zero by 2047? Is it even doable? Right? Maybe it's not. Then why are we sitting here discussing it, right? So this is, again, a polling question. I'd like all of you to get your smartphones out and Hopefully, are you seeing this question, Nikhil? Okay, so what you need to do is to ask yourself the question, does India have any advantages, inherent advantages in the race to net zero? Right? Pretend all countries are racing towards net zero. Do we have some advantages? Rank order the ones that you think are important by clicking on it first, and then click on the next most important, and the next, and the next. And when you're done, hit submit. So you're rank ordering 5 things to say what are India's advantages in the race to net zero. Give you a few more seconds and then we'll end the voting. I'd like everyone on Zoom, whether you're hearing me or not, to vote. So another 10 seconds for your voting. Folks in the back, you're welcome to vote. If anybody needs help logging into the system, just raise your hand. We'll get you some help. Yeah, you have trouble? You need the QR code is on that sheet of paper that's coming towards you. Anyone else need help? Just raise your hand, please. Okay, is everyone done voting? Anybody need more time? Okay, let's hit the button. Okay, this is very, very interesting. So by far, most of you think that the biggest strength that we have is our scientific prowess. And let's talk about that for a second. Of course, I gave it away with a little picture here, so with the moon mission. But really, when I think about it, there are, in my mind, even more impressive things. I mean, we came up with a vaccine in record time. 2.4 billion doses domestically, 240 million doses exported to 101 countries, and they actually worked, unlike our northern neighbor. So, I mean, there's really something. There's really something there with that scientific prowess. I'm sorry. Yes, tracking everybody. A digital society. And most people don't even know this, that we are the second largest manufacturer of mobile phones, right, in the world. Demographics, we'll talk about that. And it's interesting, that came second. Entrepreneurial spirit, we're in the startup capital of the world here in Chennai. So, of course, that came up there. Big digital society. Unique and low greenhouse gas profile got 5th, and this is where we're going to have a little fight, but we'll get there as well. So very, very interesting. Let's go to the next page, please, Vikram. Let's talk about demographics. If I look at the demographic pyramid of India, it has this very interesting shape that I call the palm leaf shape. Let me show you how to interpret this diagram. Basically, the vertical axis is age from 0 to 100. And the number of men is on this side in blue, number of women on this side in red. And when there's an excess of men over women or women over men, you see the dark shaded regions. So there's an excess of men by a little bit at younger ages and an excess of women at older ages, which is true in most parts of the world. Okay, but what you see is an enormous younger population. And the median age is just 28.4 years. Compare this to China's demographic, which I call the pagoda shape. And you see, first of all, a lot more older people. Nothing wrong with older people. We respect them a lot, but society has to care for them. And in their 20s, you have a big hole because of the one-child policy that they had several years ago. And you see that the median age, oh, I'm so sorry, I went too fast. Nope. I'll get it back. Okay, the median age is 39. So if we decide that this is a huge push that we're going to do, we need the smart people, we need the workforce to do this, and there's simply no question that that is a big advantage. I want anyone that has an empty chair next to you to raise your hand. Empty chair, and you got an empty chair because someone can sit there. Come on, everybody. There's no reason to stand in the back there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 chairs. If you're willing to take these chairs, do so. Right in the front. Keep your hand up until everyone's seated. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Awesome. So, believe it or not, India has the most English-speaking science, technology, engineering, math graduates of any country in the world. And admissions to higher education are 49.7% women. And India will supply 25% of the incremental labor force of the world in the next 2 decades. This is a broad, deep, strong labor force, right? That's a huge, huge factor. Let's talk a little bit about greenhouse gas profile. And I think this was ranked last, right? But in some sense, if I ask you to go to 0, starting from a low number is a good thing, right? It's a hugely good thing. So here's the greenhouse gas profile for 4 representative countries. The blue bars are CO2, the orange bars are methane, and then you have a little bit of nitrous oxide. United States per capita is about 17.5 tons, and India is about 2.73 tons. You can interpret this in many ways, and one way to interpret it is that we're about 25 years ahead of the US in the race to net zero, because they're not going to get to 2.7 tons per person for another 25 years. However, I will tell you that these numbers are false. So why did I show them to you? I showed them to you because if you go to IEA, you go to Our World in Data, you go anywhere, these are the numbers you're going to see, and they are false. So let me tell you why they're false and then show you the true numbers. So they're false because the accounting of methane is plainly wrong, okay? So methane is the biggest component of natural gas. Natural gas is about 92% methane. There are 3 main greenhouse gases we've discussed: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. We combine them into one number for greenhouse gases by multiplying the amount of each gas by its global warming potential. It's an index that says how many times worse than CO2 is that gas. Now, over a 20-year period, methane is 81.2 times worse than CO2. Molecule for molecule, it is trapping 81 times more heat than CO2, okay? Whereas over a 100-year period, it tends to dissipate, and it's only 27.9. Now, everybody uses that 27.9 number to scale the methane. I would claim that the next 20 years are the most critical in our fight against climate change. What we do in the next 20 years will resonate for 5,000 years. Otherwise, we're going to have 2 meters of sea level rise. Forget Chennai, gone, okay? So we must redo our numbers with 81.2. I cannot tell you how many times I download stuff from websites, shove it into a spreadsheet, redo all the methane numbers, and redo the total. I do it over and over. Yes?
Why is the global warming potential of only methane changing? Because nitrous oxide and CO2 are same. Whether it's 20 or 100 years, why is the global warming potential of only methane changing so drastically?
Both carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide stick around for a very long time in the atmosphere, so their global warming potential doesn't change. It doesn't dissipate that quickly. It does dissipate in the case of methane, okay? And the question is, do you want to assess the damage over a 100-year period or a 20-year period, okay? Now, keep in mind that for countries that have pipelines for methane, these pipelines leak. Even if you use a cylinder system, it leaks when you fill it, it leaks when you give it back, it leaks in your house, okay? And so unburnt methane going into the atmosphere is extremely potent and dangerous. And the 2.5 to 3% that leaks in, let's say, the US gas system makes the burning of natural gas worse than coal. Everybody tells you we've gone from coal to gas, we've made progress. We have not made an iota of progress. It is worse. Once you add the CO2, which is admittedly less, and the leakage, it's actually worse than coal. Now, there's particulate emission, which is reduced, but from a purely CO2 or greenhouse gas point of view, you are much worse off. And of course, everybody talks about capturing carbon, and our trees capture carbon, but nobody's talking about capturing methane, and the trees certainly don't capture methane for you, right? So let's redo our numbers. Here is a little quote from the COP28 that's going on. Methane is the blowtorch that is boiling the planet. Turn it off, and you immediately turn down the heat. In answer to your question, how do we do this? So let's redo the numbers. And surprise, surprise. Of course, the US went up because a lot of the natural gas leakage got increased by a factor of 3. And so you end up above 20 tons per person per year. And India went up. And in fact, India went up more proportionately. And we're now at just shy of 4 tons. And surprise, half of that 4 tons is methane, right? So where is all that methane coming from? This, by the way, is an opportunity, because if so much of our greenhouse gas profile is methane, for every molecule of methane that we abate or don't release, we're making progress 80 times faster. I see this as something that's great, right? We can make progress faster. So where's all that methane coming from? If you look at the greenhouse gas profile in India, 81% of all that methane, which is half the total problem, comes from agriculture. We're an agricultural country. And then there's a little bit of fugitive emissions, that's the leakage, and then waste. What does it look like in the US? It's the other way around. Fugitive emissions are the biggest, and then agriculture, and then waste. So our greenhouse gas profile is very different from other countries. It's lower, which is good news, and it's a lot of methane, which is kind of good news because you can make progress quickly, right? So let's talk about that. Very quickly, if you look at the US greenhouse gas emissions by sector, you see that 72% is electricity and heat, transport, fugitive emissions, buildings. So what you have to do is you need EVs, you need heat pumps, you need solar, you need wind turbines. You need a lot of capital expense to fix this. And then you get the rest, the waste, the agriculture, etc., etc. If you look instead at India by sector, what you see is the top 2 are agriculture and electricity. That's because we're using so much coal in this sector. Those are the top 2. It's a completely different profile, and the way you would fix this is also completely different. So we think through for ourselves exactly how we're going to approach this problem. And then, of course, you have the rest, manufacturing, construction, transport, and so on. And by the way, the transport piece, there's a lot of 2- and 3-wheelers, which is unique to India, and they turn out to be the easiest to electrify. There's a bunch of unique advantages that we have in all of this. I'm going to just spend 2 more slides in this section and then get to the fun stuff. And the 2 slides I'm going to talk about are the 2 big sectors, agriculture and the power sector. So when you think of agriculture, 42% of India's workforce is in agriculture. Huge. They are generally not so well off. There are a huge number of farms, and each farm is small. These are all the problems that get cited. How are you going to deal with this, right? Now let's keep in mind that China, India, Russia did not sign the methane reduction at COP27, and so far they're still resisting it at COP28, right? Keep that as background, right? If we're going to do something in agriculture, it has to be a win-win-win. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And Professor Rajneesh taught us this morning very nicely. If something's not a win-win-win, it's not going. It's not going to fly. What is a win-win-win? A win-win-win puts money in the farmer's pocket. Otherwise, why should they even talk to you? It reduces methane. And it reduces resources needed, like seeds, like fertilizer, like water. If you can come up with such a win-win-win, your program has a chance. Otherwise, it simply doesn't have a chance. So what would such a program look like? 2 parts to it. India has the largest cattle population in the world. Not the most milk, but the largest cattle population in the world. And if you look at the breakup of agricultural methane, the vast majority of it, 63%, is from livestock. And this is where we can offer farmers a way to achieve a 5x milk productivity increase in exchange for all the techniques that will lower methane, including the diet that's fed to the cow, the selective breeding, the manure management, all the things you have to do. If we can make this a win-win-win program, that is the single biggest greenhouse gas contributor in India. Now, how many people are you hearing saying, we should go to net zero, let's go after the cows? That is what I'm saying. That is what we need to do, okay? And then rice cultivation is the second biggest, okay? And here again, there's a doubling of productivity that we can offer, right? In exchange for all of the methane reduction. And frankly, the amount of water we use is excessive, and it's becoming a very, very precious resource. And there are any number of methods that are available, and I won't go through the details, where again, we can make it a win-win. You get more rice out of your acre of land. We put money in your pocket, but we teach you some techniques, and those techniques are environmentally better, and they use less resources. I mean, how can you say no to that? Now, what would it take to roll out this program nationwide, etc.? I don't know, but it certainly looks like an exciting thing to think about and try. So let's talk a little bit about our electricity sector, right? So here's an audience participation question, just show of hands. How many people think that gas, natural gas, should play a big role in our journey towards net zero in the electricity sector? If you think the answer is yes, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And somebody online says yes too. And here is where my feeling on this is that, I really don't want to mess with methane. And you can't do this without that 2.5 to 3% leakage in the system. And you might as well burn coal. So why are we making this transition? And it's an import, right? And we would love to be as independent as possible. So another question. We should invest heavily in small modular nuclear reactors because they're carbon-free. How many people think the answer is yes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, how many people think it's no? Okay, lots of people didn't vote, I guess. So here, we could spend the whole hour talking about SMRs, and one of the board members of the Energy Consortium is one of the world experts in SMRs, of course. But I've read enough about this to convince myself that the answer is no, and it's no because of economics. The small modular scalability has not proven itself, hasn't worked out with NuScale, hasn't worked out in China. And for pure economic reasons, I just don't see a path. And some of the concerns about nuclear, like safety, are not particularly addressed much better with small reactors than large. But it's a matter of opinion. Now, if you're saying no to this and no to that, then okay, what's the path, right? So let's talk about our grid. We have 409 gigawatts of generating capacity. 166 of those gigawatts are carbon-free. It's just under 40%. The goal, as we learned this morning, is to get to 500 gigawatts of carbon-free by 2030. Will we make it? Perhaps not, but that's the goal. That's where we're going, right? The goal is to have the electricity sector 50% carbon-free by 2030, so half the job by 2030, and total carbon intensity across the economy to be 40% reduced by the year 2030. Keep in mind also that we have built 7,000 kilometers of transmission recently to serve as an open access corridor for green electrons. In other words, you can have wind and solar in remote places and bring that energy in. So,
Hey, sure. No problem. Yeah, please.
okay. Not sure that was a question for me. And then we have the PLI, the production linked incentive that the government did in 2020, I think. There's $2.4 billion for PV manufacturing. There's $2.3 billion for ACC, advanced cell chemistries for batteries. There's $2.2 billion for green hydrogen. So there's tremendous momentum to get this grid going, right? So the way I look at all of this is, if I were asked, I need help advancing. Yeah, thank you. So if I were asked to make a plan to get to net zero by 2047, it would look like the government of India's plan with a few little tweaks. However, the time is compressed. There would be 3 stages. There would be the sort of what I call low-hanging fruit, easy stuff, gathering momentum, and then cleaning up. And low-hanging fruit, as you would imagine, reduce coal use, ramp up wind solar, hit our targets for 2030, heavy focus on rolling out these agriculture things, electrify cooking, etc. And you see digital transformation there. And we talked this morning about how that's such an essential part of moving. And that could be a great strength for our efforts. Gathering momentum, get the light-duty transportation fully to net zero, get electricity to net zero, start making progress on the heavier duty stuff, shipping, aviation, and then the hard-to-abate stuff, cement, steel, etc. This is why we pay Satya the big bucks. He's going to solve all of this for us in time for that third. Right, Satya? I'm going to take care of all this. But my point is, we need now to have the innovation, the startups, etc., to kick in this decade for us to clean up the last bit. Now, keep in mind that 75% of the emissions are here and then a little bit here, right? That's tremendous progress early. Every bit of early progress helps the climate double. Making progress later doesn't help us as much. So, my question to you, and this is a poll question, if we truly set our minds to it with all our scientific prowess and government lines up and all parties agree, and we decide this is a priority for India and we're just going to go for it, the question is, can we do it by the year 2047? And I admit I'm asking this question in a premier institution. However, I'd love to know your opinion, so voting is open. In other words, did I convince you at all in this section? Anyone need more time to vote? Okay, folks online, we'd love for you to express your opinion as well. Let's get the results, please. Thank you. Yay! All right, I'm happy with this result. So 2/3 of you think that we can actually do this. Now the going gets really tough, third section, right? That's the hardest of the sections. So let's advance here. And in the third section, we all agree it's a climate imperative. 2/3 of us agree that if we really set our mind to it, we can do it. But why should we bother? What's in it for us? Why should we do this, right? And to try to answer this question, I thought I would start by saying why we shouldn't, what is not a good reason for us to do it. And to illustrate this, I worked with an illustrator, a cartoonist. His name is Mr. Satvik Gade. He sketches for the Hindu paper cartoons, and he did this, thank you. He did this cartoon for me where you have the rich countries being very accusing and saying, we demand to know when you will stop using coal. And we have our very cool and dapper external affairs minister saying, well, we'll phase out coal when you phase out gas, or when your per capita crosses ours, or when we get climate finance, or whatever, right? And you have someone like Greta standing there saying, come on, when will you guys grow up, right? So the point I'm trying to make with this cartoon is we need all of our leaders to work together. There is only one carbon impact. It's global, right? It doesn't matter, right? So we either have catastrophe or we ward it off. So the bottom line here is we need all of our leaders to work together. And so I'm not saying we should do this because there's some international pressure. Who cares, right? We should only do it if it's beneficial to us. So the answer to all of this is economy, economy, economy. We want to uplift millions, hundreds of millions of people. You only do that by growing the economy. This is out of a report from, you can't see the reference here, but it's from Ernst Young. And it's basically our Amrit Kal between now and 2047. And you see that what's predicted is a $26 trillion economy by the year 2047, according to this study, approximately a 6% growth in our GDP. Just historically, at the turn of the century, India's economy was number 12 in the world. The last 3 years, we've been one of the fastest growing economies worldwide, and we are at number 5. We've overtaken the UK in terms of just total size of the GDP. I think Japan and Germany will likely get crossed this decade. It will happen. And then the prediction is China number 1, USA number 2, and then India number 3 Now, the question really is, okay, this is all fine. This is aspirational. Someone did a study. They probably made a very big spreadsheet. But what will it take to get there? Because if we truly grow this, we're talking $15,000 per year per capita income. That is a sea change in the way Indians live, right? And so what is it that it'll take to get there? And there's about 8 factors. I'll rattle them off. And you can be sure that energy is big in all of this, right? So first, we have the whole service industry, especially IT. It's $255 billion. It's been growing 14% a year every year for 10 years. Unheard of kind of growth. That's got to keep going. We're the capability centers, the office of the world. It employs 5 million people. That's got to keep going. These are the hyper growth vectors that we have to nurture if we're going to do this, right? So that's number 2. Manufacturing, more domestic manufacturing, less imports, and that's what the PLI is all about, right? Number 4, infrastructure, big one. Invest in infrastructure, make business easier, so on and so forth. Number 5, finance, make credit available. Number 6, digital society, right? And we're moving very, very fast, increases transparency, improves confidence for business. And of course, energy, right? So in other words, I'm saying we cannot get there if we don't become self-reliant on energy, if we don't reduce imports of energy, and if we don't create millions of jobs in the energy space. We're not going to get there. Now, that is a real reason to do it. That is a real reason to do it. So, can we just get there much faster by doing nothing? No, it needs investment. And there are multiple studies that you can consult. We heard some numbers earlier in the conference. But if we are going to net zero by 2070 or 2047, it is approximately a $3.4 trillion additional investment. Please keep in mind this is over a 24-year period, because otherwise it's bigger than our GDP. It's over a 24-year period. Please keep in mind that this is the sum total of private money, government money, foreign investment, all coming together. And the government money can be used to just make the right conditions to pull in all of the other money, like the Inflation Reduction Act that we heard in detail yesterday, right? And I would argue this is the best bargain. And remember, this works out to about 1% of GDP between now and 2047. We spend 1.4% on healthcare, should be bigger. We spend 3.1% on education, right? So this is a smaller investment even than some of those. So last slide here, I'm going to try to convince you that there are compounding benefits to making this investment and using all of our prowess and labor force to go after this goal in a very aggressive way. Point number 1, anything you electrify becomes 3 to 4 times more efficient. An electric vehicle is 3 to 4 times more efficient than an internal combustion engine. A heat pump is 3 to 4 times more efficient, etc., etc. Cooking is more efficient on electric, right? So the very fact that you electrify and decarbonize, you save primary energy right away. Point number 2, for every 100 liters of petrol that you use, 33 liters go into mining, refining, and transporting that petrol. What does that mean? For every liter that you don't use, you don't need that 1/3 of a liter to mine it, refine it, and transport it. That's a compounding benefit as you decarbonize. And governments all over the world, including the Indian government, give the fossil fuel industry huge subsidies, low leases for drilling, onshore, offshore, etc. And why are we putting money into that which is poisoning the world, right? Let's move that money to where we want it to go. These are compounding benefits from getting away from our addiction to fossil fuels. Economics. Well, do we want to keep importing energy? Approximately 90% of our energy needs come from fossil fuels, and approximately 45% of that is imported into India, right? Why are we letting foreign exchange leave the country? We have sunshine, we have wind, it's our own. Let's just use it, right? And every time the world has a hiccup, a war, a COVID, whatever, our economy suffers. We suffer inflation because of something happening, right? Because gas prices go up and down. I mean, oil prices. Let's be independent of that. What's not to like about that, right? Health is a big, big one. There are 6.7 million deaths due to air pollution worldwide. 6.7 million deaths due to air pollution. 1 in every 4 is in our country. There's no pride in this statistic. We're not looking after our citizens. And that will clean up when we stop burning fossil fuels. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And everybody says, whoa, we have so many coal jobs. What are we going to do? The answer is those coal jobs are going to end sooner or later. The question is, how do we transition them? How do we retrain them? And how do we give them a better job? And there are various studies, one from Tata Energy Research Institute, one from Council on Environment, Energy, and Water, I believe, saying how many jobs you will lose if you just stop the coal industry. And that's the number of jobs you would add from all the investments, right? And so this is a transition. When we went from horseback to cars, people lost jobs, you know, and the question is, how is it handled and how is the training done? Net, you're going to create a lot more jobs than you lose. Even our own union minister has said 2070 is a little too long term. It's really an underachieving kind of target, right? Really underachieving target. And just to illustrate that, Yale University does an annual ranking of 180 countries on what's called Environmental Performance Index, or EPI. And they take various factors and weight them and combine them to get this. And India is ranked 180th out of 180. There's no pride in this statistic, right? So at the end of the day, what I'm saying is we can improve the economy, save our foreign exchange, create jobs, transition faster. We can improve the health of Indians. People ask me all the time, is Bangalore a nice place? And I say it's a lovely place unless you want to breathe, right? And we can help the planet at a very, very important time. So with that, we come to our last question, which is the same as the first question, and you get to answer one more time at the end of this session. So pull out your smartphones and vote on whether you think, irrespective of published policy, should we strive to obtain net zero by our 100th birthday. Voting is open. Same for the people on the phone. Anyone need more time to vote? Okay, let's reveal the results. Wow. So here's the interesting part, right? The breakdown of colors is based on how you voted at the beginning of the talk. Okay, so bear with me. So a few people that said 2100 now became 2047. That's a complete swap. Lots of people stayed at 2047, and some 2070s moved. And here, a couple of 2047s moved to 2070. So I unconvinced a couple of people. Fine. But all in all, more than 3/4 think we should go for this. They think we can do this, and they actually think that this is to our benefit. Otherwise, why would we do this? So let's just go forward, please. So with that, I'm going to conclude, except, go to the next page, please. You get one more poll question, while maybe we take a question if there's time. And this question says, what words come to your mind when you think of climate change? Some people have already started voting. So just a gut response. When you think of climate change, what word comes to mind? You can type up to 5 words. And as you keep typing, this word cloud will keep building. Before I conclude, I just want to thank Nikhil, who's been driving all day, all conference long there, and keeping us all working. So thank you. And this book goes to a young entrepreneur from IIT Goa who is here for the energy conference, who came up with the first tipping point. So congratulations. We probably don't have time for questions, but there we are.
Thank you, Dr. Chandu. I hope the audience here as well as on Zoom enjoyed your session. If there are